Jane, can you understand that some people might be choking on the Weet-Bix right now because you're in power for a decade, to be fair? And I think it's fair that I point out that we've just come off the back of a term of parliament where you are the biggest spending, you were the biggest spending government in history. You've left quite a legacy.
Well, look, I understand why you would say that, Laura, but the most important thing for a government to do is to respond to the circumstances of the day. This is a government now that is facing two significant crises, one in inflationary pressures and one in fuel prices. And they're already beginning to go to water. The previous coalition government faced drought, fire, floods, a global pandemic, a global recession, a war in Europe, and then instability in our own region, and it responded appropriately to do that. That's why at the end of our term of government, we had the lowest unemployment rate that we'd seen in nearly 50 years, including the lowest female unemployment rate in 50 years. That we also had fewer people on welfare and more people in work, and that means that the government revenues had improved, and that's why we could actually improve the budget bottom line by $100 billion in one budget alone, the biggest budget turnaround that we'd seen in more than 70 years. That was our acknowledgement that fiscal responsibility needed to step up in a post-pandemic world. It's now the opportunity for the government, the new government, to do the same and demonstrate that they have the fiscal credentials that they promised during the election campaign.
Less than a month into this new government, the energy crisis has cropped up. You wouldn't blame the Albanese government on that, I assume. But what do you suggest they should do about it? The unions have suggested some kind of export tax, a new tax. Would that work?
Well, I think the first thing that they need to do is better engage with the gas companies. In 2017, when the coalition government saw a spike in gas prices, the first thing they did was put in the trigger mechanism that allowed them to engage with gas companies to say, well, your job is to keep prices low and ensure that there is enough supply for the domestic market. And that's exactly what they did. At that time, Chris Bowen called that mechanism, well, I can't say it on television because it's a swear word, but he said it was BS and a fraud on the Australian people. Well, now that's the mechanism that is exactly what Chris Bowen needs to use. And let's face it, he's the minister responsible for this. Has he picked up the phone and spoken to Meg O'Neill at Woodside? Has he picked up the phone and spoken to Frank Calabria at Origin? These are the people that he needs to speak to in order to make sure that supply is there and that prices can be maintained. And if you've been disparaging towards the gas industry for the 9 years that you have been in opposition, well, then it's very hard to build those relationships to make sure that supply is there once you're in government. So there's a bit of building that needs to be done.
All right, we'll see where that ends up. Thanks for keeping this a family show. Jane Hume, I appreciate that. We'll check in with you soon.